start anyway, so I think we should press on.
Okay, super.
Well, should I just do a little intro, Helen? Just say
Okay.
I'm David Emmington. I'm partner at Barrow Smith. My colleague Nicola Davies may be known to you. She hopefully so, because she is the chair of the Southern Committee of the PLA, but she's unexpectedly unavailable today. She kindly set up this event, so in her absence I've agreed to welcome you all and welcome Helen. As I said, I think there's in excess of 180 people that have registered. Today we're going to be hearing from Helen Swaffield with her talk entitled Litigating Indemnities, which I'm sure is a subject that has vexed many of us as to what the different forms of indemnities and warranties are. It might be something that could be fairly heavy going, but having had the pleasure of Helen speaking at a number of in-house training sessions at Barrow Smith in the past, I'm sure that she'll be able to bring much needed clarity to this subject. So thank you, Helen, for joining us today. I believe the talk will be approximately 30 minutes.
A little bit longer, actually, 45, if that's okay.
About
so
45 minutes.
Yeah, we'll get a wiggle on.
Helen said she's happy to take questions during the session and afterwards as well, as may be appropriate. There is the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, I think, which is the place to put your questions up. And as I said, we'll have a session at the end as well. Our marketing and sort of Zoom guru, Georgina, is in the wings just in case there are any sort of technical issues that people may have. Her recommendation, in line with standard IT advice, is if you do have any problems, try logging off and on again. That usually sorts any issues out, connectivity problems. But anything else you can put in the chat box, and Georgina will be monitoring that. So that was all on my hit list. We are recording this session, and we will be sending out a copy of it, which I think will end up appearing on the PLA website, and Nikki Davies, your chairman, will, I think, probably be sending an email out with the link to it in due course. So Helen, please take the stage.
Okay, folks. Well, listen, as we've only got 45 minutes, if we manage to do all of this, I'll be really pleased. And the point about an indemnity is that it's often a creature that's used by non-contentious lawyers in order to boost, maximize, de-risk, create financial accountability. What we're doing as litigators is unpeeling it to see exactly what we've got and to try and help and put input into our non-contentious teams around us. So if we manage to do all of those things, I'll be really pleased. The thing is that there are different types of contracts. I know you know this. The ones we all litigate, and I was doing one yesterday, which was an informal agreement. Indemnities don't work very well with performance-based contracts or contracts that have been left in the drawer and everybody's forgotten about. You really do. You can't imply an indemnity. You can't perform or conduct an indemnity. You can only write it down and either breach it or not. And for those of you who are sort of, when you're looking at, and a lot of what you're doing in property law won't touch battle of forms, that's much more sort of relational and commercial. But that's another issue there, is that when you get this kind of top trumps thing, then you'll see the incorporation point is always the first. It's the same as the exclusion clauses, really. So these introductory slides are just to say, actually you need to track all, is it a properly executed document with counterparts, or are they trying to get these things in a sort of way that is less orthodox, shall we say? That's new media on a term sheet. Only it was the contract. Heads of terms, no, it's the contract. Letters of intent, no, it's the contract. You know, memorandum of understanding. Now, what I always say to people who are drafting is that you've really got to turn your brain on with indemnities, because it's very similar. David's already mentioned a warranty. It's not a warranty. A warranty is about performance and promise and things being correct if you're doing SPAs, or things continuing through the life of the contract and beyond if you're doing relational contracts. And they're used in very different ways, those two context for warranties. Guarantees are moving with the contract. Liability, as we all know, litigators, has got things like breach and causation and remoteness, but that's not what an indemnity is. And if we look at the kind of, and I'm just going to leave you to look at these things given the shortness of time, but if you can see immediately what you have with a warranty is all about performance, promise. But where you have an indemnity, it's just a wonga, you know, just pay it. And that's all you're going to have there. So the marriage between the two of them is fantastic. So what we often get is I warrant, I warrant, I warrant. And then you turbocharge it with, and if there's a problem, I indemnify. So you get the best of both there. And ditto with liability. You know, liability is great. I love liability, don't you? You know, you can exclude it, you can cap it. But actually what it does is give you just a mighty headache in terms of, is there a breach? What's the obligation? Is it a high obligation shall or a low obligation endeavours? But with an indemnity, we don't care. We don't care what the obligation is. Nobody measures in nominate terms. Nobody measures wrongful repudiatory breach, anticipatory repudiatory breach. We could have a lovely webinar on all of that. Irrelevant. It's just pay it. And that's because the most important point of the whole thing, and you'll get this really quickly, my drafters won't. It's a cause of action in debt. You prepay a debt. You put a debt into the contract, like a sort of break glass in an emergency, and it's eat what you kill. Guarantees, coexistent with the contract. There's lovely, you know, the W.H. Smith's cases where they managed to sort of vary it and change it, and then some of the guarantors said, well, I didn't know that it was going to be a garden centre. I thought it was a warehouse. I guaranteed the rent in a warehouse contract. And you've turned it into a garden centre. Nobody told me about that. And that was enough to disapply the guarantee. Wouldn't have a prayer with the indemnity. That's because guarantees have a lot of equitable defences. Fascinating area. Things like variation or unusual features. From lovely waste transfer case where people were sellotaping or gluing themselves rather to bulldozers to stop the village from being spoiled by this ghastly monstrosity, and then the contractor had to pay out, and the guarantor said, nobody told me about, you know, these people who were gluing themselves to the heavy plant, and that was enough to disapply the guarantee. You won't get equity and indemnity out of your mouth in the same sentence, litigators. They're American, capitalist, just pay it. That's all it is. So you avoid all those problems of having to kind of work out whether there's a defense to the guarantee, work out whether the guarantee is primary or coextensive. No, just break glass in an emergency. Okay. So the other thing we need to think about is not just whether the indemnity is in, but whether or not, you know, if some people have deeds as well. I mean, I hate deeds. We could do another whole webinar on executing deeds, because if you get it wrong, well, you won't get it wrong. They will get it wrong. If they get it wrong, then I'm afraid the whole thing risks being void. And that's another way of, you know, the problem, because then you do take the indemnity down with you. So you've got this lovely agreement, and it's somebody's decided to do it by deed, and we get the wrong people signing, or there's no witness, and the whole thing is void from the beginning. So, you know, just before we start, let's trap the ball. That's the most important slide. It's the cause of action in debt, and you'll get that really quickly. Often it's a blank check. That one isn't on the picture, but if you can imagine what you're doing contractually is placing that blank check into the contract. But what I think is a really good idea when you're litigating it is to identify the type of indemnity. And there are 6. Here we go. Number 1, a bare indemnity. They're short. And they have words like all or any. They're good words if you are the indemnified. They're not so good if you're the indemnifier, because they cover a multitude of sins. Pay me any amount whatsoever, howsoever, you know. The reverse one is even worse. Now, this takes some mental adjustment, litigators. You pay me under the indemnity. Thank you. even though I am partly to blame. You pay me under the indemnity, thank you, even though life is partly to blame. You pay me under the indemnity, even though I am entirely to blame. And I have people in my civil code jurisdictions who say, is that legal? Yes, it is, because it's not about liability. It's about the apportionment of financial risk. You pay. Pick me, I'll pay. All right, you can pay. So those are reversing the rules of liability, and they are deadly. It's impossible to defend them. Proportionate or limited indemnities suit the indemnifier because they scope the extent of the indemnity. Third parties are when we have party C bobs up. So unless party C bobs up and says, I'm going to make a claim, nobody bothers. We carry on between us, you and I, but then the indemnifier, the indemnity says, if David pops up and says he wants a claim because the IPR is wrong or the tax or whatever it is, then that triggers the indemnity. The third party is the trigger for the indemnity. Financing indemnities you find in guarantees. And the problem with that is, again, there are some real drafting howlers, because often the defense to the guarantee pulls the whole thing out. And we'll see how that works. It very much depends. The usual precedents for guarantees are poor. It very much depends if you have managed to plant your indemnity in a little kind of autonomous cocoon as an independent cause of action. Here's your guarantee, drop a line, indent, new number, new side heading, and here's the indemnity. But the indemnity has unilateral declaration of independence from the guarantee, even though it's sitting in the same document. It's creating a cause. Look, your mortgages, pay the mortgage, guarantee to pay the mortgage. If you don't pay the mortgage, indemnify. Three causes of action: the obligation, the secondary guarantee, and income, the cavalry, brake button into emergency. There's your pre-planted debt. But not everybody drafts like that. Sometimes the guarantee and the indemnity are so mixed up together. You take the guarantee out with one of these lovely equitable things, you take the indemnity out. So there has to be some thinking about how those financing ones work. And the best one, which they use in the States all the time, if you're working in the States, you'll get all of this. They've given up on liability. And I do too. If I'm a purchaser, and I know the seller will exclude the dickens out of their liability, I say, don't worry about liability, put your purse away. We'll have a reciprocal indemnity. And what that means is it's not going to obey the same rules as liability, even though it's based on breach. So I'll indemnify you if I'm in breach, but I won't, because I'm the purchaser, so I'm only going to pay, and I'll exclude payment from that. And you indemnify me as the service provider because you look really hooky, based on breach. So we've done away with liability and we've replaced it with a reciprocal party-to-party indemnity. So it doesn't obey the same rules as liability at all, but it's working. It looks good. It looks like, well, that's fair. Mrs. Swaffield is going to give. No, but she's not really, though, is she? Because she's only the purchaser. You're the one on the hook. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Have a go at this for me, please. There are 6 types of indemnity and there are 6 words. Off you go. Match the word. Come on, litigators. The non-contentious bods will be able to do this. Match the corresponding word to the corresponding indemnity. I'll give you half a moment to think about that. And I'm working a few words here deliberately because every word counts in an indemnity, because you have to show the court which way round you're going. So, for example, you know, if you stand up to do an indemnity, you have to say, look, this is the route we're going to take, Judge. I'm going to show you this and this and this and this, and then we'll get there. So let's have a look now. Number 1 and number 4. I'm working 2 words, howsoever and whatsoever. Now, they're important words. Number 1 is bare. Any loss whatsoever. In other words, the scope of the indemnity is wide. Number 4 is reverse. because the cause of the indemnity. So with number 1, it's any loss caused by X. In number 4, it's any loss caused by however, because howsoever is knocking out causation, which is fatal. So number 4 is reverse. It reverses the standard rules of causation, whereas number 1 is bad enough, but all that one is doing is holding on to X being the cause, but it's taking out everything in the scope of X. But number 4, X puts their hand in their pocket for everything, even if it is contributed to by Y or by life. So number 4 is terrible for X. Number 2, there's your financial one. Now look at number 2. It's been drafted deliberately badly because it's locking the indemnity onto the guarantee. Let me give you a better, and that's great for X if you have to give it, because you can shoot or if you litigators, if you can't find a defense to a guarantee, you should be packing up now. There's legion. If I were Y, I would want number 2 to say X guarantees and as an independent cause of action indemnifies. Guarantee, drop a line, indent, new heading, indemnity. X guarantees as an independent cause of action indemnifies, UDI. Number 3 is the reciprocal one. X and Y shall each indemnify the other. So, and you know, ostensibly they look fair, but life's not fair. It will cut up badly for one party, depending on what their roles are in the contract. Number 5 is a third party indemnity based, and we typically see them, but it's badly drafted deliberately because there's no, David's not in there. X indemnifies Y for any claims by whom? Do you see what I mean? It should say X indemnifies Y for any claims by David in relation to IPR. It should nominate the third party and not just leave it fluffy, because they could come at you from any quarter. And number 6 is a reciprocal one. X indemnifies Y for loss, is a proportionate one. X indemnifies Y for losses caused as a result of, so linking X to the problem. Now, it's really important that we grab hold of that, because it's going to set us on a different tack depending on the type of indemnity. And you should be really alert when you're litigating these things. You see, if you're litigating number 1, then you're going to have a whole load of stuff about scope. If you're litigating number 4, you're going to have a terrible time on causation. But if you're litigating number 6, then you've got this inbuilt defense, which is limited to, I'm only paying for my omissions, not necessarily my actions, but just my omissions. Every word counts. Verbs are quite important too. Indemnify, defend, hold harmless. I do not think, though I know PLC says otherwise, I do not think that you can have an indemnity just by using words like covenant or shall be responsible for. That's not an indemnity. That's a species of contract. It's not a species of debt. Defend is really about specific performance. Step in and do the kind of, don't worry, I'm super person, I'm here. Hold harmless is very far reaching because it allows people to, again, step in really and pay it. And the case on hold harmless is quite nasty in this jurisdiction. It didn't have a meaning until a few years ago. It's called Burley House. And there they were very keen on stepping in. And even though the debt had not yet occurred, it was just a property contract. It was just holding them harmless for the lease. And normally you have to create the debt before you pay it. Is it a debt? Is it, yeah, not yet. No, we haven't quite got that far yet. Oh, well, hang on a minute. I'll wait for it to become a debt and now you pay it. And so they were quite intelligent defense. They said, well, it's not a debt yet. I mean, he hasn't paid all the months, you know, he's paid month one and that's a debt. But can you pay up front? Can you set up a standing order? And the court said, well, it's clear that they can't pay, and it's clear that they can't pay for the term of the lease. So just do it. But we haven't got there yet. Yeah, but just do it, because obviously they can't pay. So that was done on the ticket of hold harmless, specific performance, even before the debt had crystallized. That's quite nasty, isn't it? That's like a future indemnity. We love a good condition. And this is Tullow. Somebody was unpopular. Nobody can draft time is of the essence. I don't know what it is. People assume that when they say by 4 p.m, you know, on such and such a date, it works. But this indemnity had a condition precedent. They had to become aware of a tax claim, and they had to apply a time limit as well. And the time limit isn't shown you in there, but in the rest of the agreement, there was an awareness condition, and there was a time limit. You need to say time is of the essence, though, on these time limits. And the court said, well, have you satisfied the condition precedent? We get this in SPAs with warranty disputes. You only get a warranty for 2 years or so. And then people serve the notice on the last day and realize that they haven't met the conditions precedent. Same thing with an indemnity. Have you met the conditions precedent? Now, we looked at verbs. The other thing to really pull apart are nouns, and this is one of these really important slides too. I know, because you're litigators, you'll get this quite easily. My drafters won't. Loss is a creature of debt. Expenses, debt. Revenues, debt. Amounts, fees, fines, penalties, monies, fees, costs. We don't need a judge. It's liquidated. Just find the chit. Show me how much you've spent on. How much did they fine you? How much did the Inland Revenue want? What's the amount of the rents? But when you go over onto the other side and start to talk about judgments and damages and claims and proceedings, it gets a bit airy-fairy. And then we do need a judge or an arbitrator or somebody to say, how much is it? Do you know, I'm a contracts girl, and I was in Money Claims Online, or somebody had started, and I wanted to plead against them a declaration. I love declarations. I do them all the time because they're quite cheap, actually. And they take you a long way contractually, I find. You get good value for money out of a declaration. And you don't have to terminate the contract, you see. You just say, well, let's pop into court and see what they say about the fact that you haven't paid us. You know, interpret the meaning of the clause. I'm not terminating. No, we carry on, you know, but I'll just ask the court. And that normally brings people to the table. And the Money Claims Online looked at my declaration and said, we can't do this. What have you done, Mrs. Swaffield? You have to go to accounting. You can't, get out, you know. We only recognise financial claims. And I thought, you know, that's very similar to this problem here. The indemnity is a cause of action in debt. You can't start a debt action until you know how much it is. So in the journey to an indemnity, you have to crystallize, liquidate, identify the amount of money. I mean, they're perfectly sensible indemnities, but you're not going to get it like that. You're going to have to go via a court. So put a mix of both in and choose carefully, litigators. We've seen some recent cases where the court is identifying that trigger. And people don't always think about this. Loss, when I suffer it. Damages, at the end of the trial, liquidating the amount. Is it a debt? Not yet, hang on. Claims, well, how much are they claiming? Well, let's have a look. Expenses, when have you got, I've paid them quicker. And the guarantee, is the guarantee triggered to trigger the indemnity? Payable, is it enforceable? So here's the payable case. This was Minerva Las Bambas, the Peruvian tax authorities, and they kept appealing. And well, you know what that means. You don't pay. Yeah, stay, appeal, went on for 12 years. And it was great. The indemnifier just said, well, it's not yet. No, not yet. Hang on, because payable. Is it now? No. And that's the problem with indemnities. It's a bit like a Russian doll. You've got to say, well, it's an indemnity. We're home and dry. No, hang on a minute. Open the doll. What have you got inside? Have you got a cause of action? Look at the nouns. Is it liquidated or unliquidated? Look at the verbs. Look at the type of indemnity to see what you can do with it, to see how far you can take it in terms of a defence. It's not true to say that it's always a debt. It's a debt wrapper, but when you open it, it could mean damages, in which case you're going to go backwards, not forwards. Liquidated, just pay quickly. Unliquidated, well, you might have to mitigate. Oh, it's an indemnity, I don't have to mitigate. Wrong. If it's damages, you know this. What walks through the door with damages is mitigation, remoteness, Hadley and Baxendale. You get what the word says. Little doll, another little doll on remoteness, another little doll on mitigation. I love these cases. These are litigators turning up to court, asking for the money. In Marito, they went to in Workman, sorry, they went up to the Court of Appeal. They said, we've got an indemnity for damages and they're not paying. And the High Court wouldn't enforce it. So here we are at the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal said, hello, it's lovely to see you. Go back and have a trial on damages and then we'll see you. And the other side didn't even turn up, litigators. Normally you win. But the court said, you're mad. This is an indemnity for damages. Go and crystallize your damages and then you can enforce it as a debt. Is that okay? Some other cases there as well. And this is why it's so difficult when people say, what's the limitation period for an indemnity? And I said, I don't know. Because it depends on the type. Now, if it's an indemnity that's triggered by breach, it'll go with breach, 6 years. But if it's an indemnity that's triggered by expenses, you have to wait until you've suffered the expenses, 6 years. So that Peruvian Las Bambas one, it hadn't got off the starting blocks. Is it now? No, not now. When that debt became payable and they'd stopped appealing, 6 years. It's tricky, really tricky. We had the best contract interpretation case. And often what people do with an indemnity is they slam it all together in one paragraph. And you can see the problem here, where they've got loads of words for money in red, and then some conditions precedent in blue. And they tried to say that it was now. Is it now? Because look, there's proceedings and losses and claims and damages, and we've suffered some of these. But the court said, have you been to the FSA? Did you? No, we don't want the blue. We just want the red. Look, there's a comma after incurred. But the court said, yes, but there's no full stop. This is ever such a simple case. There is no full stop until the end. We just keep on going. This is about a contract paragraph headed indemnity. The comma won't stop you. Semicolon, drop a line, indent, new number. Really get the towel round your head, gang. Sit down and read it carefully. They could not get home on actions, proceedings, losses, claims, damages, costs, charges, expenses. Not one of those would work for them in red, because they had not been to the FSA or the Ombudsman. Nice. There you go. It does exactly what it says on the tin. Now, I often, at this stage, as we're just coming to around about the 75% of the webinar mark, lose people. There we go. Internet's back. And just compare the two. Put yourself in the shoes of X. And if you're bored, you can do the Dr. Seuss. Weasel words. Which one do you want? Top or bottom, you're X, you're paying, you're the indemnifier. Please get this right. It's a test. And most of you have got it, haven't you? Well, you don't quite know why you've got it. Yeah, you've got it because if you identify the differences, adjectives, let me give you a tip. Adjectives always pull the indemnity down. Foreseeable loss, that's tort. What's that doing in there? You have what you like, eat what you kill. Shove in a bit of foreseeability, that'll confuse the dickens out of the court. Proven breach, that's a trial. This is it, are we there yet? No, got to have a trial. Not only have I got to breach, but you have to prove it. How are you going to do that? See what I mean? Adjectives always pull it down. Whereas in the bottom one, that's ghastly for X, isn't it? Howsoever, did you spot that was a reverse indemnity? You're not going to run much against howsoever caused. The causation element is gone. Nice lot of losses, comma, damages, comma, costs, comma, claim. Oh, you pick. Which one's going to crystallize quickly? If it were me, loss will crystallize quickly. It will crystallize quicker than damages, because damages needs a trial, a quantum trial. Expenses is best, monies, revenues, fees, penalties, amounts payable. Lots of hooks. There you go. And there's the reverse one. Oh, all those reverse ones. I must just tell you that you're not going to ever do one of these with me without Hadley versus Baxendale, because it all makes us feel just fab, doesn't it? Hadley versus Baxendale, because it's still going. And I really like that. And Hadley versus Baxendale is the thing about anticipated contemplation of the parties or arises naturally. So it's our remoteness test. And I was speaking to the pupils yesterday, and they were saying, well, can we have this, that, and the other? And I said, well, actually, some of that loss is just too remote in contract law terms. Not everything people claim for breach of a contract is recoverable. And the Capita case comes from an SPA where and I see this in the PLC all the time, they tried to stretch the indemnity by using the words in red. And the court said, oh, this is a nice Russian doll, it's an indemnity. Oh, look, there's something peculiar about remoteness, because normally if it's a debt, I wouldn't have, what they were trying to do is link the debt to the services. And you know what the court did? It said, oh, that sounds like something we've heard before. Direct or indirect. Oh, what's that case? Hadley versus Baxendale. No, I don't want Hadley versus Baxendale. I want just do it. Just pay it. I don't want you to examine a Russian doll on remoteness. Well, then why did you put in direct or indirect? That's what you called for. If you put that in, that's an argument on remoteness. And they lost. They lost the indemnity because the court said, that's far too remote. No, I don't want remoteness attached to my indemnity. I just want you to pay to the full extent of the lot. But you didn't write that. You wrote direct or indirect. We'll go back to Hadley. Pushing it up. Quick and dirty. Use liability as well, so you give them a choice. Has ever caused to the full extent of that amount, no direct or indirect, notwithstanding and as a separate cause of action, because I don't want the indemnity spoiled by the guarantee or by the limitation of liability. I'm declaring UDI. If you want to spoil an indemnity, you need lots of little Russian dolls. Start using words like breach, because that isn't quite right. Can you breach with a debt? No, I don't think you can really, can you? Causation, caused by. If you have unliquidated amounts, then we have to go and liquidate them before the indemnity even starts. Remoteness, directly or indirect. I'll put a little Russian doll in there. Mitigation, conditions precedent. So time, you've got to claim your indemnity within a certain time. And you can also cap it as well, give them a top to it. I was asked to redraft a suite of documents for somebody, and they said, we went to a good firm. And I said, there is one huge mistake. This fee earner who's drafted you these documents obviously hasn't understood this. They think that the limitation of liability itself caps or limits the indemnity. Look at the boxes. The indemnity is a cause of action in debt. Now, you can cap it, you can exclude liability, but the standard exclusion clause in a contract won't do it. That's SABIC. Because it's a different type of thing to liability. So you need to cross-pollinate. This poor fee earner hadn't got that point at all. Had to redo the agreement. There we go. Let's round up. Right. Which type of indemnity is it? How does it relate to the warranties and the guarantees and the liability? Is there a condition precedent? Quick fix debt language. Hold harmless, defend. Have you got nouns which are liquidated or unliquidated? What about triggers? This word trigger, is it upon demand? Oh, hell, it's now. But I had a lovely one just last week. Upon demand and breach. Oh, well, is it now? I don't know, because it's triggered by breach, but the person who was drafting the indemnity got terribly confused and put in upon demand. Hang on a minute. You can demand all you like. We haven't sorted out the breach yet, but you often see that. Multiple triggers confusing everybody. What about direct or indirect? Is there a little Russian dollar remoteness in there? And what about causation? Howsoever caused. Oof. Oh, who's she? Right. Let's see, David. I've confused the dickens out of everybody at great speed. What questions have we got?
Can't see any questions at the moment. We invite people to put them in the Q&A box.
Is everybody all right with what we've... Yeah. I can't see the Q&A box, I have to say.
Can you not?
Let me see if I can...
I've got it up on my screen. There's nothing there presently.
No. Does anybody want to unmute and ask anything, or how
Here we go. We've got one coming up in the Q&A from Alison Hardy.
Oh, yep, you're right. I can.
Please explain more
Alison,
about
could you please explain more about the cap on liability? Okay, if you've got the time, certainly. So there we are. Certainly, Alison. So if you've got a standard exclusion clause and it says no liability for breach, misrep, negligence, howsoever caused, but it doesn't say indemnity, the indemnity will work and is unaffected by the exclusion clause. The only way that you could exclude liability under the indemnity, it's a nuisance that liability under the indemnity is the debt claim, yeah. But judges use liability under the indemnity as opposed to liability pure, which is linked back to your obligation. Only way you can do that is to say, and there would be no point, nobody would agree this, exclude liability for breach, misrep, negligence, and the indemnity. But what you often see is a cap. So the total amount payable under this contract is £5,000. Now that's been framed to cope with all of those boxes. So you've got both the indemnity and the liability. I tell you what I often do. I often disguise it. I often say liability for indirect losses or any other cause of action. Because I know they won't cap the indemnity. They want the indemnity up their sleeve. So do you see, or any other cause of action is my attempt surreptitiously to block the indemnity cause of action with that cap without telling them. But otherwise, what you have to do is actually nail it. and either put the cap in the indemnity to a maximum of, or refer to the I word in the limitation of liability. So discerning the scope of the limitation of liability is really important. But the presumption is there's the indemnity, then you've got some space, there's liability, and they don't naturally cross-pollinate at all. So you have to read it to see if you've stretched to cover the indemnity. Is that all right? And this was the second one on that slide, was an American. He walked through the door, he said, I've got a fantastic limitation of life. Let me show you, because you know nothing, you know. And I said, I'm terribly sorry, it doesn't work. You can say in no circumstances till you're blue in the face, and you can stamp your feet, you can put it in capital letters in your contract. That second one is not touching the indemnity. It's not specific about it. Is that all right? Righty-ho, that's a good question. Yeah, what were you going to say about Arnold and Britton? Arnold and Britton was the one without the full stop till the end. Arnold and Britton is the one that, there you are, there it is. Oh, Arnold and Britton, sorry. Oh, yeah, that one flashed up, sorry. Yeah, that's about interpreting the indemnity using the words. Arnold and Britton is the literal case, isn't it? And the court's going to read your indemnity very carefully indeed. Every word counts. There is no better clause in a contract for every word counts. So that's sort of in support of the proposition that if I say it's a claim for expenses and what you've got isn't an expense claim, then it's not going to cover it, because I've written expenses and I want the text of expenses. Is that all right? Super questions. I thought everybody had to go. Hang on, let's chat. Hang on, somebody's in the chat. Attendees can't unmute. Okay, so that's from Georgina. Right, sorry. Attendees, you can't unmute. Thank you, Georgina. Yeah. But for everything else in the contract, we normally do text and context. We have a kind of little look a bit, we stand back in the contract. But, Arnold and Britton is great on the actual text. And I mean, it's a really technical clause, isn't it? You read it and things have got to jump out to you like the Dr. Seuss. You've got to know the value of each word in that clause. That's why I think it's fantastic. It's either been really well drafted or it's an absolute nightmare. And you think you've got more than you have, litigators. But and sometimes if you're for the indemnifier, it's finding the argument, isn't it? Creating those little Russian dolls within the big doll. This is an indemnity. Yes, but there's an issue here, there's an issue there, there's an issue there. You keep the game going. You can ward off summary judgment with that sort of thing. Oh, it's just too much for lunch, isn't it? Where's the coffee, everybody? Right, is that it? Lovely. Okie dokie.
For questions, unless there's anybody typing now, just pause a moment. No, nothing seems to be appearing. So Helen, thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
As I anticipated, you explained what could be a heavy going subject in a manner that I'm sure everybody found to be very clear. Disappointed there's no questions about the spotting the difference between the cats and hats. Clearly people must have got that.
Do you want me to do actually? I'll do that one for you. Sorry, I should have done that. Yes, because I always give it to people when they're sort of feeling better. The spot the 5 differences there. If you got it, one's in the hat, one's in the whisker, one's in the bow tie, one's in the finger, and I've forgotten what the other one is. Whiskers, hat, bow tie, finger, the nose.
The nose. It's in the nose. So that's great. So hopefully everybody got something out of that, even if it was just spot the difference.
Okay.
That was great. So normally at this point, I'd ask everybody to signify their appreciation. Of course, if we were in a room, we'd be hearing people clapping, but as Georgina said...
Oh, no, you're very welcome. We can't
unmute and give you a round of applause. So
oh, you're very welcome.
just thank you very much indeed. And just to reiterate that we'll be putting up this very useful webinar on the PLA website. So thank you very much on behalf of the PLA. Thank you, Helen.